The tragic Christmas evening story of Alona, Salvatore, and Gianni Christmas is meant to be a season of joy and love. But for one family, it became a night of unimaginable tragedy. What started as a simple mall pickup turned into a heartbreaking mystery that would leave a community in shock and searching for answers. Today, we'll uncover the story of Alona, Salvatore, and Gianni, a story of love, loss, and a senseless crime that stole 3 young lives too soon. As we share this emotional journey, your support can make a difference. Please like this video, leave your thoughts in the comments, and share it with someone who values stories that uncover hard truths and honor memories. Let's begin this powerful story that reminds us how precious life truly is. The Christmas of that year was meant to be like any other. Homes lit up with twinkling lights, families gathering to share warm hugs and happy memories, and the sweet smell of Christmas trees filling every room. But in a mall parking lot in Provo, Utah, something happened that would shatter this peaceful holiday scene forever. 3 precious lives were lost in an act of violence that no one saw coming, leaving a whole community wondering how such darkness could touch their lives during what should have been the happiest time of the year. At the heart of this story is Alona Gregoria Flint, whose life began thousands of miles away from Utah. She was born in a tiny Russian town called Naryanmar, so far north that it touched the Arctic Circle. On March 21st, 1991, the day she came into the world, the temperature outside was so cold it could freeze water in seconds, minus 34 degrees Celsius. It was the coldest March day anyone could remember in that little town. You might think someone born in such a cold place would grow up to be cold-hearted, but Alona was quite the opposite. Her smile could warm up any room she walked into. When her family moved to the big city of St. Petersburg, Russia, little Alona showed everyone just how special she was. There's this story from when she was just 5 years old that really shows what kind of person she was growing up to be. One day at a busy train station, she got separated from her parents, a nightmare for any family. But while her mom and dad were frantically searching for her, racing back on the next train, they found something amazing. There was Alona sitting calmly on a bench, making friends with everyone around her, chatting away like she'd known them all her life. Her mother would often tell people Alona never met a stranger. In her eyes, everyone was just a friend she hadn't talked to yet. She had this special gift of making people feel like they'd known her forever, even if they just met. It was like she carried a little bit of sunshine with her wherever she went. But how did this little Russian girl end up in Provo, Utah? Well, that's where Jeffrey Flint's story joins hers. Jeffrey grew up in Arcadia, California, where the sun always seemed to be shining. His path led him to Brigham Young University in Provo, where he found himself drawn to Russian culture so much that he joined the Russian choir. But singing Russian songs wasn't enough for Jeffrey. He wanted to experience Russia firsthand. So, after 2 years of college, he packed his bags and headed to St. Petersburg as a missionary for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Jeffrey threw himself into his missionary work with all his heart. He spent 15 months in a remote part of Russia, where he did something pretty amazing. He started a program that helped Russian and American nurses learn from each other. But the most important thing he found in Russia wasn't a program, it was love. He met Igna, Alona's mother, and it didn't take long for them to realize they were meant to be together. They got married on June 28, 1997, and soon after, Jeffrey brought his new family, Igna and 7-year-old Alona, back to Provo with him. Back in Utah, Jeffrey went back to school, earned his master's degree in international management, and landed a job as an analyst at Proactive Incorporated. Everyone who worked with him knew him as the smart guy who never gave up until he succeeded at whatever he was doing. Meanwhile, little Alona was starting her own adventure, learning to live in a completely new country. Even though it wasn't easy at first, Alona did what she'd always done best. She adapted and made friends, bringing her special kind of warmth to her new American home. From the moment Jeffrey became Alona's stepdad, he loved her as if she'd been his own daughter from day one. Even though everything in America was new and different for Alona, she faced each day with the same brave spirit she'd always had. There's this wonderful story from her first trip to Disneyland that really shows who Alona was at heart. She didn't know English yet, but when she got the chance to sing on stage, she didn't let that stop her. Instead of staying quiet, she made up her own words and sang her heart out, making everyone fall in love with her fearless spirit. This little girl who barely spoke English was stealing the show with nothing but confidence and joy. The Flint family grew bigger and happier as time went on. Jeffrey and Igna welcomed two more children, a daughter named Alina and a son named Richard. Alona, now officially a Flint after taking Jeffrey's last name, blossomed in her role as a big sister. She filled their home with piano music, spent hours exploring outdoors, and treasured every moment with her family. But life can change in the blink of an eye, and in 2003, their happy world was turned upside down. Jeffrey, the man who had brought so much love into their lives, suddenly collapsed from a heart attack at home. In that terrible moment, it was 12-year-old Alona who somehow found the strength to call 911. Even as her heart was breaking, she kept her head clear enough to try to save the only father she'd really known. The loss of Jeffrey hit everyone hard. He was such a special person that even the Chicago Tribune wrote about him, sharing stories of how he'd touched so many lives with his kindness. But life has a way of bringing light back after darkness. Igna eventually found love again with a man named Nathan Jones. Together, they added two more children to the family, Evie and Dimitri. While these new additions brought fresh happiness, Alona channeled her grief into determination. She threw herself into her studies, working so hard that she became a state finalist in Utah, an achievement that would have made Jeffrey incredibly proud. It was during these teenage years that Alona met someone who would change her life forever, a 16-year-old boy named Gianni Belvedere. Gianni came from a warm Italian family who had moved to Provo in 1997, the same year Alona had arrived from Russia. His father, Leonard Belvedere, was a successful restaurant owner who had built a small empire of Italian eateries, including the popular Tao's Italian. The Belvederes were a close-knit family who believed in working together and supporting each other, values that matched perfectly with what Alona had learned from her own family. When Gianni and Alona started dating, it was like two puzzle pieces fitting perfectly together. The Belvedere family didn't just like Alona, they loved her. They saw in her all the qualities they valued most. She was caring, always thinking of others, gentle in her ways, and sharp as a tack. Pretty soon, it wasn't just Gianni and Alona, it was Gianni, Alona, and Gianni's younger brother, Salvatore. The three of them became so close that people started calling them the Three Musketeers, always ready for their next adventure together. Life was good, but change was coming. Leonard Belvedere decided it was time to reconnect with their roots and bought back their old family restaurant, Mario's, in San Diego. The whole family was getting ready to move to California, but young love had other plans. Gianni couldn't imagine life without Alona, so he did what his heart told him to do. He asked her to marry him. Alona, following her own heart, decided to leave everything she knew in Utah to start a new life in California with Gianni. The Belvederes found their new home in El Dorado Hills, a beautiful neighborhood with views that took your breath away. Their 4-bedroom townhouse quickly became a place filled with love and laughter. While Gianni and Salvatore spent their days working at Mario's, keeping the family business going strong, Alona started building her own future too, enrolling at Grossmont Community College. It seemed like everything was falling into place for this young couple and their loving family. Life in San Diego seemed to settle into a beautiful rhythm for the family. Gianni took charge of running Mario's restaurant, and he was perfect for the job. His warm smile and natural way with people made customers feel like part of the family. In the kitchen, Salvatore worked his magic as the chef, turning simple ingredients into works of art on a plate. Their father's restaurant was becoming more successful each day thanks to the brothers' hard work and passion. Alona found her own place in their new city too. She landed a job at a charming vintage clothing store in the Westfield Mission Valley Mall, where her eye for fashion and friendly personality made her a natural fit. The store's owner, Andre, quickly saw what a treasure Alona was, not just as an employee, but as a friend. She brought the same dedication to her work that she brought to everything else in her life, never doing anything halfway. Since Alona didn't drive, getting home from late shifts at the mall could have been a problem, but it never was, thanks to Gianni and Salvatore. The brothers took turns picking her up, making sure she never had to worry about getting home safely. Andre got to know both brothers well from their regular appearances at closing time, and he could see how much they cared for Alona. It was just another example of how the three of them looked out for each other, always making sure everyone was safe and taken care of. At just 22 years old, Alona had her whole life ahead of her. The same was true for Salvatore and 24-year-old Gianni. Alona and Gianni were building dreams together, planning their future like young lovers do. They talked about getting their own place someday, starting a family, and building a life surrounded by the warmth of Gianni's big Italian family. Every day seemed to hold new possibilities, and their hearts were full of hope for all the wonderful things to come. But sometimes life can change in ways we never expect, and dreams can slip away in an instant. It happened on a cold December night in 2013, just before Christmas Eve. Alona had finished another late shift at the mall, and the clock was creeping toward midnight. She walked out to the parking lot, expecting to see Gianni waiting for her like always. They'd been texting throughout the day, and he'd promised he'd be there to pick her up. When she got to the parking lot, though, something felt wrong. Her text to Gianni went unanswered. She tried calling him, but the phone just rang and rang. It wasn't like Gianni to ignore her calls, especially when he was supposed to pick her up. With no other choice, she called Salvatore to ask for help. Salvatore was worried too. He knew his brother would never just disappear without saying anything. He tried calling Gianni himself, but got the same silence in return. As Alona sat in Salvatore's car, their worry grew stronger with each passing minute. They started making calls to anyone who might know where Gianni was, hospitals, medical centers, even jails. But nobody had seen him or heard anything. The clock kept ticking, and by now it was almost 1:10 a.m. Alona didn't want to wake up Gianni's parents and worry them, so she kept trying to find answers on her own. But at 1:11 a.m., everything changed forever. Alona made one final call, this time to 911. Her voice trembled as she told the operator she was in the Westfield Mission Valley Mall parking lot, and then she spoke words that would shatter countless lives. She had been shot. After that, there was only silence, but the line stayed open. For 15 long minutes, the only sound was the weak sound of someone struggling to breathe. Police officers raced to the scene, arriving at 1:24 a.m. When they found the car, their worst fears were confirmed. Alona was there in the passenger seat, slumped over and unmoving, her dreams of a future with Gianni forever frozen in that terrible moment. The scene that greeted the police officers that night would stay with them forever. Alona, the bright young woman with so many dreams, showed no signs of life. The doctors could only confirm what everyone feared. She was gone, taken by multiple gunshot wounds, including one to the back of her head. But there was another victim in the car. Salvatore, shot between the eyes, was somehow still clinging to life in the driver's seat. Emergency teams rushed him to the hospital and put him on life support, fighting to keep him alive while police turned the parking lot into a crime scene. As investigators looked more closely at the scene, several things didn't make sense. The car was parked in an unusual way, sitting so close to another vehicle that it almost touched it. On that cold December night, the driver's side window was rolled down, something that seemed strange given the weather. At first, the investigators thought they might be looking at a robbery gone wrong, but that theory quickly fell apart when they found valuable items still sitting untouched in the car. Their minds turned to other possibilities. Could it have been an attempted carjacking? Or maybe there had been an argument between Alona and Salvatore that had turned violent? But as they searched the area and found no weapon nearby, these theories started to seem less likely too. The lead detective had a gut feeling that there was something bigger going on here, something they weren't seeing yet. Whatever had happened in that parking lot, it was now officially a homicide investigation. Lieutenant Mike Hastings later shared more details about that terrible night. He explained how everything started unfolding around 1:15 a.m. on Christmas Eve when the San Diego Police Department got Alona's desperate 911 call. She had managed to tell them she'd been shot, but in her confusion and pain, she could only give them a general idea of where she was, somewhere near the Mission Valley Shopping Center. When officers finally found the car in the 1600 block of Camino del Rio North, they discovered the heartbreaking scene: a young woman already beyond help and a young man fighting for his life as they rushed him to Mercy Hospital. The investigation team spent hours listening to that final 911 call, trying to piece together what had happened. Something strange stood out to them. While Alona had said she'd been shot, there were no gunshots heard during the call. This raised an important question. Had she been shot before making the call, or had the killer used something to make the gun quieter? When they found shells from a .22 caliber gun at the scene, things started becoming clearer. The use of a silencer suggested this wasn't just some random act of violence. It pointed to someone who knew exactly what they were doing and how to get away with it. This was starting to look more and more like a planned killing. The investigators turned to the mall's security cameras hoping for answers, but luck wasn't on their side. Most of the cameras weren't working that night. However, one camera on the side of the mall where the shooting happened did catch something important. It showed Alona leaving work and walking toward the parking lot before disappearing into the darkness. Those grainy images of her last moments alive only added to the mystery of what had happened after she walked out of the camera's view. Looking at all the evidence, the investigators couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than just another tragic shooting. The careful planning, the use of a silencer, the precise shots, everything pointed to someone who had thought this through. What had started as a routine late-night pickup had turned into something much darker, and somewhere out there, a killer was walking free while a family was about to face their worst Christmas ever. As dawn broke on Christmas Eve, the investigators faced a puzzling challenge. They needed to figure out who the victims were. The car they found had Utah license plates, but it wasn't registered to either of the young people inside. Instead, it belonged to someone named Leonard Belvedere, who was much older. While searching the car, they couldn't find any ID for Alona, but they did discover a passport belonging to Salvatore Belvedere, the critically injured young man in the driver's seat. Armed with this information, police officers made their way to Leonard's house early that Christmas Eve morning, knocking on his door around 7 a.m. When Leonard answered, he confirmed what they had pieced together. Yes, the car was his, and yes, Salvatore was his son. His face grew worried as he explained that the young woman was Alona, his other son, Gianni's girlfriend. Then Leonard shared something that made the investigators' hearts sink. He hadn't been able to reach Gianni since the night before. This new piece of information changed everything. Now they weren't just investigating a shooting, they were also looking for a missing person. But an even more troubling question arose. Could Gianni somehow be involved in the shooting of his own brother and the woman he loved? As they wrestled with this possibility, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. 2 women called 911 with information that made everyone's blood run cold. They had seen something strange in the parking lot that night, a man standing by the driver's side of a car who then quickly jumped into another vehicle and sped away. Their description of both the man and the car matched Gianni perfectly. This new information forced investigators to consider the unthinkable, that Gianni might be connected to this horrible crime. They quickly put out a missing persons bulletin for him and flagged his car in the system. But while the search for Gianni was just beginning, another tragedy was unfolding at the hospital. Salvatore, who had been fighting for his life since the shooting, was declared brain dead. 2 days after Christmas, when families should have been celebrating together, the Belvedere family had to say goodbye to their beloved son and brother. The community came together to remember Salvatore in a beautiful way. Nearly 100 people gathered at Crystal Pier in Pacific Beach, a special place where Salvatore had loved to surf. During the memorial, his cousin Paul Donato shared something that showed just what kind of person Salvatore had been. He told everyone about how Salvatore, who had a rare blood type, had always wanted to be an organ donor. In their grief, the family honored his wishes and donated his heart, allowing Salvatore to give one final gift of life to someone in need. The pain of losing both Salvatore and Alona was almost unbearable for the Belvedere family, but the mystery of Gianni's disappearance added another layer of agony to their suffering. In a last desperate attempt to find answers, they organized a press conference. The moment Antoinette, Gianni, and Salvatore's sister stepped up to the microphone was heartbreaking. Her voice trembled with emotion as she spoke directly to the cameras. Gianni, if you're watching this, or if anyone knows where our brother Gianni might be, please, we need him to come home. As tears rolled down her cheeks, she added words that brought many in the room to tears. We love you, and we miss you very much. The family wasn't giving up. Working with Crime Stoppers, they offered a $10,000 reward for any information that could help solve the case, but as days turned into weeks, they found themselves living in a terrible limbo, mourning the deaths of Salvatore and Alona while desperately hoping for news about Gianni. Every ring of the phone brought both hope and fear. Would this be the call that finally gave them answers about their missing son and brother, or would it bring even more heartbreaking news? As days passed after the shooting, people started wondering if Gianni might have done something terrible, killed his brother and the woman he loved, and then run away. But everyone who truly knew Gianni couldn't believe it. How could someone murder their own brother? How could Gianni hurt Alona, the woman he wanted to marry? People who saw them together knew how deeply in love they were, and there was nothing to suggest any bad feelings between Salvatore and Alona. It just didn't make sense. The investigators dug deeper into Gianni's phone records, hoping to find answers. What they discovered was strange and troubling. Gianni's last phone call had been to his cousin, Mario Donato, on the evening of December 23rd. Mario told the police something that sent chills down their spines. The call had started normally enough, but Mario noticed something wasn't quite right with Gianni. He sounded different, somehow off. Then, around 11:45 p.m., Mario heard Gianni suddenly start yelling and cursing before the call cut off without warning. The timing of that last call was important. It happened just minutes before Alona finished her work shift at the mall. The phone records showed something else interesting, too. While Gianni's phone was in the mall parking lot, Alona had been trying to reach him all afternoon, but he never answered. After midnight, when she couldn't find him, Alona spent a desperate hour calling everywhere she could think of: hospitals, jails, anywhere that might know where Gianni was. Her last call would be to 911 at 1:11 a.m. While these phone records helped police understand when things happened that night, they were no closer to finding Gianni. His family was living through a nightmare, mourning Salvatore's death while worrying about what role Gianni might have played in this tragedy. As days went by without any sign of him, local news stations kept showing his picture, asking anyone with information to come forward. The community came together to remember Alona and Salvatore with candlelight vigils, their flames flickering in the dark like the lives that had been taken too soon. Meanwhile, in Provo, Utah, Alona's family held a private ceremony to say goodbye to their beloved daughter and sister. Despite all the news coverage and the ongoing search, no one seemed to know what had happened to Gianni. Then, 3 weeks later, on January 17th, 2014, something happened that would bring this tragic story to an even darker end. Gianni's car was found in Riverside, California, about 90 miles from where anyone had last seen it. A worker at a fast food restaurant had noticed a terrible smell coming from a car that had been sitting in their parking lot for several days. When they looked closer, they saw what looked like blood on the front seat. The police quickly connected this car to their missing person case for Gianni Belvedere. When investigators arrived from San Diego to look at the car, what they found was heartbreaking. There was blood on the passenger side of the car, and it was clear someone had died there. But the worst discovery came when they opened the trunk. Inside, they found a body in terrible condition, surrounded by aerosol cans that had been taped to keep spraying air freshener, a crude attempt to hide the smell of death. The mix of decomposition and artificial freshener was overwhelming for even the experienced investigators. Through dental records, they confirmed what the Belvedere family had feared most. The body was Gianni. The medical examiner determined he had died around Christmas, probably the same night as his brother and Alona. Like them, he had been shot in the head. The way his body was positioned told investigators a tragic story. Gianni had likely been shot while sitting in the driver's seat, then moved to the passenger side before someone drove his car away with his body inside. The discovery brought a terrible end to the search for Gianni, but it also raised new questions. If Gianni hadn't killed Alona and Salvatore, who had killed all three of them? And why? Finding Gianni's body answered one terrible question, but it opened up so many more. The police soon discovered something that changed everything. The same gun, a .22 caliber Ruger, had been used to kill all three young people. When they looked at the bullets taken from each victim under their special microscopes, they all matched perfectly. This confirmed what Gianni's loved ones had been saying all along. He couldn't have killed Alona and Salvatore because someone had killed him too. All the dark theories about love triangles or betrayal melted away. There had been no secret romance between Salvatore and Alona, no hidden reason for Gianni to want them dead. Instead, it seemed like someone had deliberately targeted these three young people, leaving their families and the whole community searching for answers that seemed impossible to find. The investigators knew they had to find the person who did this. But they didn't have much to go on. Their best lead was a brief glimpse of someone leaving the parking lot in Gianni's car. They turned their attention to the car itself, hoping it might hold the clues they needed. Something caught their eye. The tape used on the license plate matched exactly with the tape holding those air fresheners in the trunk. This seemed important because it meant the killer had probably put it there. The tape gave them two promising leads, a fingerprint and some DNA. But when they ran these through their computer systems, they hit a dead end. Whoever had done this had never been caught for any other crimes, which made them much harder to find. Frustrated but determined, the investigators decided to start fresh, looking at everything again as if for the first time. Now that they knew Gianni wasn't the killer, they focused on finding this mysterious person who had taken 3 young lives. They went back to talk with everyone who worked with Alona at the mall. One coworker remembered something strange. A man had asked Alona for directions to Buffalo Wild Wings, but after she helped him, he turned around and followed her instead of going where she had pointed. The way this person was described matched perfectly with the man seen in the parking lot later that night. This new information sent investigators rushing back to look at the mall's security footage again. They found what they were looking for, a brief moment showing a man walking behind Alona, the same man she had given directions to. Following this lead, they tracked him to Buffalo Wild Wings, where they found a receipt from his credit card. But after checking where he was that night, they had to cross him off their list of suspects. The investigation then took an interesting turn as they wondered if someone in the Belvedere's large Italian family might be involved. They even considered whether this might have been some kind of organized crime hit. But after spending countless hours going through family members' phone records, emails, and social media posts, they couldn't find anything to support this idea. As weeks turned into months with no answers, the families refused to let their loved ones be forgotten. They created a website to keep people talking about the case and offered money for anyone who could help solve it. The website became a place for family and friends to share their memories and grief. Gianni's mother's words there broke hearts across the community. "I remember when you were so little, and sometimes I wish you were small again." Her simple words captured the deep pain of a mother who had lost her son, reminding everyone that behind this mystery were real families whose lives had been torn apart. Every new day without answers seemed to make the pain worse, but it also strengthened the family's determination to find out who had done this and why. They wouldn't let their loved ones become just another unsolved case file. They needed to know who had taken these 3 young lives, who had stolen all their dreams and futures, who had left such a huge hole in so many lives. "You brought so much joy into our lives from the moment you were born. Your laughter filled our home, and your love touched everyone around you. But just when we thought we might never know what happened to you, fate had other plans." It was a cold winter morning on January 18th, 2014, just before dawn at 4:45 a.m. At a border checkpoint in San Clemente, California, something unusual caught a patrol agent's attention. A man named Carlo Mercado seemed nervous, leading the agent to search his car. What they found was disturbing: an AR-15 rifle, a .45 caliber handgun, a handmade silencer, and hundreds of bullets. Even though Carlo had no criminal record and owned some guns legally, something didn't feel right to the agents. After taking his guns, they let Carlo go, but they weren't done with him yet. Without his knowledge, a federal agent started watching him, tracking his every move. The charges against Carlo were serious: having an assault weapon, a special handgun, multiple AR-15 magazines, and that suspicious silencer. These weren't minor violations. They could put him behind bars for years. Time passed, and on April 29th, federal agents showed up at Carlo's house to arrest him. No one came to the door at first, though they could hear people inside. The agents waited patiently. Just as they were about to give up, Carlo walked out to his car. They arrested him without any problems. Carlo admitted to having the silencer, and as part of his plea deal, he had to give a DNA sample. That's when everything changed. His DNA matched evidence from the triple murder case of Alona, Salvatore, and Gianni in San Diego. The evidence kept piling up. One of his seized guns, a .22 caliber Ruger, was the same type used in the murders. In June 2014, half a year after those terrible shootings, they arrested Carlo for all 3 murders. When they looked through his phone, computer, and house, they found even more proof. He had searched online about the Mission Valley Mall shooting before it was even in the news. They found gun manuals and instructions for making a silencer for a .22 handgun. The same kind of electrical tape used on his homemade silencer matched what was found on air freshener cans in Gianni's car trunk. But there was more. Carlos' phone held dark secrets. He called it Assassin and had bookmarked lists of violent movies like Pulp Fiction, Kill Bill, and No Country for Old Men. Most chilling of all, there was an entry in his Google Calendar for December 24th, 2013, the day of the murders. Each new piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of what happened that terrible Christmas Eve. For us, the family left behind, these discoveries brought a mix of relief and renewed pain. Finally knowing the truth about who took you away from us opened old wounds, but also gave us the answers we had been desperately seeking. The calendar entry was simple but terrifying. Just the words R.I.P. written on the night everything happened. The evidence kept building. Carlos's phone showed he was at Mission Valley Mall exactly when Gianni's phone went silent and when Alona made her desperate call to 911. The proof against Carlos seemed unshakable. They found his DNA on the tape wrapped around Gianni's body. His phone placed him at the scene, and he had the gun that took 3 precious lives. But one question kept haunting everyone. Why would he do this? Carlos and the victims were complete strangers to each other. He had never been violent before, and people who knew him said he was just a quiet person who kept to himself. For 8 years, he had worked at the same Target store, living a seemingly normal life with his sister and her family in Mesa. Nothing about his past suggested he would do something so terrible. Before all this happened, no one thought Carlos was too interested in guns. He owned them legally, like many people do, and never gave anyone reason to worry. The only time he had ever acted strangely was during a motorcycle accident in 2012. Even though the crash was his fault, he got really angry and demanded money from the other driver. This wasn't like him at all, but it still didn't explain why he would kill 3 innocent people. The police pieced together what might have happened that night. They think Carlos rode his motorcycle to the mall, maybe just to shop or enjoy a night ride. Their investigation showed that he and Gianni got there at almost the same time. Maybe Carlos's bike broke down in the parking lot, or maybe it fell over. Either way, he was stuck there without a way home. Some investigators thought that perhaps Gianni accidentally drove too close to Carlos's bike, making it fall over. Carlos was already frustrated. His motorcycle had given him trouble before, and now here he was, stranded in a mall parking lot on Christmas Eve. Maybe he thought stealing a car would be easier than calling for help or trying to fix his bike. Or maybe he was so angry about his bike that he blamed Gianni, even though it might not have been his fault. Whatever made him snap that night, Carlos walked up to Gianni's car in a rage. Gianni's cousin heard him yelling and swearing over the phone. Then Carlos did something that would change many lives forever. He took out a .22 caliber gun with a homemade silencer from his backpack and shot Gianni while he sat helplessly in his car. After the shooting, Carlos pushed Gianni's body into the passenger seat and drove away in Gianni's car. He stopped at an ATM and took out $500, acting like someone who was planning to run away. Meanwhile, poor Alona was waiting outside in the cold, wondering why Gianni hadn't come to pick her up. Worried, she called Gianni's brother Salvatore to come help her look for him. But Carlos wasn't done yet. Instead of leaving the area, he drove back to the mall parking lot. Maybe he was worried about leaving his motorcycle behind, or maybe he had some other reason we'll never understand. At that same moment, Alona and Salvatore were sitting in Salvatore's car, desperately trying to find Gianni. When they saw a car pulling up, they probably felt relieved for a moment, thinking it was Gianni. But that relief quickly turned to fear when they realized it wasn't him behind the wheel. What happened next was like a nightmare coming to life. When Salvatore tried to stop the car, probably hoping to protect Alona and find his brother, Carlos pulled out his gun again. Without hesitation, he shot Salvatore right between his eyes. Then, as if that wasn't horrifying enough, he walked around to where Alona sat. She was on the phone with 911, desperately calling for help, when Carlos shot her in the shoulder. As she lay there wounded and helpless, he fired again, this time at the back of her head. After taking Salvatore's phone and keys, Carlos got back into Gianni's car and drove away into the night. The most disturbing part When police later looked at photos from the crime scene, they found Carlos's motorcycle parked just 100 feet away from where he killed these three innocent people. His precious bike, which might have started this whole terrible chain of events, sat there like a silent witness to the horror he had caused. Carlos wasn't done covering his tracks. The very next day, as if nothing unusual had happened, he rented a U-Haul truck. He went back to get his motorcycle and came up with a clever lie. He told his insurance company that his bike had fallen off a trailer when he had to dodge an animal on the road. The insurance company believed him and paid him money for the damage. Then he loaded his bike into the U-Haul and took it away. He wasn't just thinking about his motorcycle, though. He had to get rid of Johnny's car, too. He parked it at his sister's house first, hiding the real license plate with a fake one. Then he drove it all the way to Riverside to abandon it. Knowing that Gianni's body was in the trunk, he tried to hide the smell with baking soda and air fresheners. But he made one big mistake. He left behind the fake license plate, which eventually led the police right to him. After abandoning the car, Carlos tried to act like nothing had happened. He bought a cheap car from Craigslist and went about his normal life. He celebrated Christmas with his family, went to work every day, and acted completely normal. All this time, he kept the murder weapon with him, as if he couldn't bear to part with it. His overconfidence in thinking he'd gotten away with the murders would eventually be his downfall. The police believed that road rage, mixed with Carlos's strange obsession with being an assassin, led to these senseless killings. Even his phone's name, Assassin, showed how deep this fantasy went. When they first arrested him, Carlos's lawyer tried to paint a different picture. They said he was just a quiet, normal person who could never do something so terrible. They promised to prove he was innocent in court. But just 3 days later, Carlos stood before a judge and said he wasn't guilty of the 3 murders. Things got even more complicated when Carlos started acting strangely in jail. His lawyer said he wasn't well enough to go to trial after he stopped responding to people. The guards found out he had taken too much Tylenol, making himself sick. After getting medical help, doctors found he had several mental health problems: schizophrenia, psychosis, and severe depression. Despite all this, the judge decided he was well enough to face trial. Even with all the evidence pointing to Carlos, his lawyer kept saying he was innocent. His family stood beside him too, saying they hadn't seen any real proof that he did these terrible things. They asked people to leave them alone during this difficult time. But less than a year after all this happened, doctors at the mental health facility said Carlos was well enough to go to trial, and they sent him back to San Diego to face justice. The legal battle continued as Carlos's lawyers tried desperately to stop the trial from happening. They kept saying he wasn't well enough to face a judge, but in December 2015, the court disagreed. Carlos would have to answer for what he did. 2 months later, the case took an even more serious turn when the district attorney announced they wanted the death penalty for Carlos. The trial was scheduled for April 2017, which meant the victims' families would have to wait more than 3 years for justice. But in January 2017, just before the trial was supposed to start, something unexpected happened. Carlos suddenly admitted to everything. He stood in court and said he was the one who killed Gianni, Salvatore, and Alona. While he pleaded guilty to all the charges, he never told anyone why he did it. He never explained what made him take 3 innocent lives that night. Many people thought he only admitted to the crimes to avoid getting the death penalty. The day the families got to speak in court was filled with raw emotion. Carlos wouldn't even look at them, keeping his eyes down as they shared their heartbreak. Antoinette, the sister of Gianni and Salvatore, read a letter from their mother that painted a beautiful picture of who her sons were. She talked about how Gianni could make the piano sing, while Salvatore loved strumming his guitar. The brothers would fill their family home with music during Sunday dinners. Now, she said, those same rooms were terribly quiet, echoing only with the family's sadness. Alona's mother also stood up to speak about her daughter. She talked about all the dreams and hopes Alona had, all the things she wanted to do with her life, all of it stolen away by Carlos's actions. Her words showed how one person's violent choices can destroy so many lives. After Carlos admitted his guilt, investigators shared hundreds of pages of documents about the case. What they found was chilling. Just weeks before the murders, Carlos had sent a disturbing email. When someone at work mentioned 4 killings happening in 2 days, Carlos wrote back, "Only 4 dead? That's not bad. I think people go crazy around the holidays. These words showed the darkness that was growing in his mind. The investigation revealed even more troubling details. In the days leading up to the murders, Carlos wasn't just going about his normal life, he was getting ready. He spent time making a homemade silencer for his gun, showing that these killings weren't just a sudden burst of anger. They found out he had a history of lying to insurance companies about accidents he made up, which hinted at his pattern of deception. The investigators also learned some things about the victims. There were rumors that Gianni might have been using drugs, but this had nothing to do with Carlos or why he killed them. They also found an old blog post where Alona, as a teenager, had written about her stepfather being a serial killer. Her mother explained that Alona wrote this during a very hard time when she was struggling with her father's death. One of the strangest parts of the whole case was that Carlos's name never showed up in any of the victims' phone records. They had never called or texted each other. This made the murders seem even more random and senseless. 3 lives taken by someone who was a complete stranger to them. The investigators never stopped searching for answers. The big break in the case finally came when Carlos tried to escape to Mexico carrying illegal weapons with him. That's when the police caught him and the full truth came out. The reality was both simple and heartbreaking. Carlos killed Gianni, Salvatore, and Alona for no real reason at all. Just a chance meeting in a mall parking lot on Christmas Eve turned deadly because of one man's senseless actions. At the end of the long and painful trial, Grace, the mother of Gianni and Salvatore, found a way to bring some peace to everyone affected by this tragedy. She shared a beautiful quote that touched many hearts. It went, "Death is nothing at all. It does not count. I have only slipped away into the next room. Nothing has happened. Everything remains exactly as it was. I am I, and you are you. Life means all that it ever meant. There is absolute and unbroken continuity." These words showed something remarkable about Grace and her family. Even after losing 2 sons in such a terrible way, they found the strength to hold on to love and hope. Their hearts were broken, but their spirit wasn't defeated. They chose to remember the happy times, the sound of Johnny's piano playing mixing with Salvatore's guitar, the laughter at family dinners, and all the precious moments they shared together. The family's strength teaches us something important. Even in the darkest times, love continues. They didn't let the tragedy define their loved ones' lives. Instead, they chose to celebrate who Gianni, Salvatore, and Alona really were. Not victims of a senseless crime, but beautiful souls who brought joy and love to everyone around them. Their memories live on in the hearts of those who loved them, like music that never really ends but simply moves into another room. This story reminds us how precious life is and how important it is to cherish every moment with our loved ones. Though it tells of a terrible tragedy, it also shows us the incredible strength of the human spirit and the enduring power of love. The family's courage in facing such unimaginable loss and their ability to find meaning and even moments of peace afterward is truly inspiring. Thank you for listening to this story. Though it breaks our hearts, it also teaches us about love, loss, and the strength we can find in each other during the darkest times.